Welcome members, those who are physically present this evening and those joining by video link. Welcome also to those watching on live stream. So before we begin the meeting this evening, I'd like to hand over to Rachel as Head of Constitutional Services to go through some housekeeping points.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and through you. In order to conduct this meeting in a safe manner, we ask that all attendees remain seated except for comfort breaks and that social distancing is maintained as much as possible. The Deputy Mayor has confirmed that requirements to stand when speaking have been lifted for this meeting. As we know, face masks are not mandatory in council meetings. However, given concerns around the Omicron variant and the length of time spent in meetings and those vulnerable attendees, it is advisable for members, staff and members of the public to wear face coverings during the council meeting to reduce the risk. You can therefore remove your mask when speaking. Please ensure that all mobile phones are set to silent and the toilets are at either end of the engine shed. In the event of an evacuation, the emergency exits are situated at the end of the engine shed. Please follow a member of the council staff to evacuate the building. As per normal rules, if you wish to speak, please ensure that you raise your hand and you'll be invited to address the meeting. Members who are attending the meeting virtually can indicate their wish to speak via the raise hand function in the participants or the reactions section. I would like to also remind members joining online to ensure their microphones are turned off unless they are invited by the Deputy Mayor to speak. We are unable to use the electronic voting equipment at this venue, therefore all votes will be taken via a show of hands unless a recorded vote is requested, which will be taken in the normal way. As per the last meeting, you've got laminated copies of 4 against and abstain on your table. 4 is green, against is red and abstain is yellow. When we come to vote, please raise the correct coloured document to make the vote counting easier for Pippa. I will take each 4 against and abstain in turn. Only those in attendance physically will be eligible to vote. There is also the points of order document on your table. If you wish to raise a point, please raise the pink document and address the Deputy Mayor accordingly. Finally, I would like to remind members that this meeting is being live streamed, so please make sure that when you speak, you're using your microphone. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Point of order?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to raise a point of order on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group. Whilst we accept that because of the urgency of this meeting, it is necessary to hold it with a reduced number of people, we are not prepared to accept this actually going forward, because it does create 2 classes of councillors, those who can vote and those who can't. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Your point is noted. Anything else? Anyone? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Is there any?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We've had apologies from Councillors Keam, Councillor Knight, Councillor Barkham and Councillor Lane. We have Councillors Steve Allen, Bisbee, Day, Coles, Fitzgerald, John Fox, Hogg, Howard, Jamil, Jones, Joseph, Shaznawaz, Sainsbury, Sandford and Simons formally attending tonight's meeting physically. All other members are in attendance virtually and will be recorded as such in the minutes.
Councillor Jones, you raised your hand. Is this on a point of order?
Councillor Ansar Ali is unavoidably detained. He may join us later, but I'll send his apologies in advance, if I may.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Thank you very much. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members this evening which are not already recorded separately on their individual register of interests? I see no hands. Anything on the screens? No? Okay, thank you very much. If we could move on. Before we move on to the substantive items for debate this evening, I would like to move a motion to suspend Standing Order 21.4 in relation to the length of speeches. Instead, I'm proposing to allow members to speak up to 10 minutes on both agenda items. Councillor Fitzgerald, I understand you're happy to second this proposal.
I am indeed, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Is that agreed, members? Thank you very much. Okay, so agenda item 3, capital programme moratorium. Agenda item 3 is in relation to the capital programme moratorium. Information on this can be found in the agenda pack and the additional information pack. Voting for this item will be via a recorded vote as required by legislation. Councillor Coles, would you therefore like to move the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I would. Members, I rise to propose that Council approves a temporary capital programme moratorium and a revised capital programme for 2021-2022, as set out in the papers that have been circulated. Members know we face a huge financial challenge. Any savings we can make in this financial year to our capital spend will contribute significantly to achieving financial sustainability by 2023-24. The proposal is a pause in spending, not a cancellation of projects. The moratorium is proposed to remain in place until the Council's refreshed capital asset strategy is released, which will inform how our capital spend will then be phased in future years. At the moment, only legally required or statutory capital spending is permitted. The capital budget has already been revised down to just under 85 million from the original 133. But as spend to date is only 25.5 million, there is further scope for additional reductions of £9.435 million. I recommend members approve this recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Coles. Councillor Fitzgerald, will you please second the recommendations and either speak now or reserve your right to speak later in the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I am happy to second and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call upon any of the speakers from those here physically first, and then we'll go on to those joining virtually. Okay, excellent. Are there any speakers from those joining virtually? Thank you very much. If Councillor Fitzgerald would like to exercise your right to speak.
Not wishing to delay proceedings any longer than need be, Mr. Mayor. No, I think we basically are in broad agreement here, so I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Coles, your right to sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm seeing the way this is going, and may I ask that we move to the vote?
Thank you. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Okay, this is a recorded vote. And we are voting on the capital programme moratorium as set out in the agenda pack. This will be a recorded vote. When I call your name, please state whether you're for, against or abstaining. Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Bisbee.
For.
Councillor Day.
For.
Councillor Coles.
For.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Yes, for.
Councillor John Fox. Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Howard.
For.
Councillor Jamil.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Joseph. Councillor Shaznawaz.
For.
Councillor Sainsbury.
For.
Councillor Sanford.
For.
And Councillor Simons. Thank you. Okay, that is, the results are, that's 15 in favour, therefore this is agreed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. On to agenda item 4, financial improvement planning. This is in relation to the financial improvement. Information on this can be found in the agenda pack and the additional information pack. Councillor Fitzgerald, I understand that you would like to move an altered version of the recommendation as set out in the additional information pack. Is there any objection to Councillor Fitzgerald doing so? No? Would you therefore like to move the altered recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I thank members for their cooperation tonight in order to make the matter much clearer. So indeed, the additional wording is set out in the additional information pack, which would have been circulated earlier. So I rise while seated, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to move the recommendations in this report, together with the alterations set out, as I just said, in the additional information pack to the improvement plan on governance, review and incorporating the changes to the Constitution under recommendation 6. In moving these recommendations, I want to make a few key points to set the scene for tonight's debate. So please bear with. I am sure that we all accept the serious and challenging financial situation that the Council finds itself in, and so we must approve these recommendations tonight to move forward and decisively meet these challenges. Whilst I want to look to the future, Councillor Coles in his speech to come will look to analyse the past, as members have requested, so that we are able to learn important lessons and be sure that the plans we are approving tonight are indeed the right ones. Before I do my forward look, I want to thank both my Cabinet and leaders and members from opposition groups through the Financial Sustainability Working Group who have toiled long and hard over the last month or so to enable us to bring these plans to you tonight. We've worked at speed and in collaboration, and I thank you all for that spirit of collaboration and challenge you have brought, which I am certain has made our plans much stronger. Members, first we are called to approve the terms of reference of our new improvement and assurance panel, the appointments to the panel and the remuneration to be paid. This is a panel of real experts from the local government sector, and that peer challenge and support is welcomed, as it has been in the past when we've invited others in to help us. This expertise will be invaluable in the areas of finance, governance, services, contract assets and our company arrangements. Their remuneration reflects that expertise and the contribution they will undoubtedly make to our improvement work, and follows the government guidance on the daily rates to be paid to improvement and assurance panels of this kind. Those rates are £900 per day for the chair and £800 for each panel member, together with travelling and subsistence payments. The panel's work will be more intense in the first 6 months to a year as we move at pace, but I expect this to taper off over the next 2 years. And I want to thank the panel for their commitment to the work with us, and also to colleagues in SIPFA for helping to assemble such an impressive panel. And the details of that are contained in the report for those listening online or watching that may not have had a chance to do so. The panel will prepare reports on a 4-monthly basis to the Council to provide assurance on our progress in delivering the actions in our improvement plan, which is before us tonight. We will receive and debate those reports at our Council meetings on a 4-monthly basis, so a completely transparent public opportunity. Their reports will also be submitted to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and the first meeting of the panel will be on the 21st of December, and they will make an initial report to Council on the 26th of January, thereafter on a 4-monthly basis. Secondly, we are called to approve the improvement plan, which is a key document and has been drafted at pace by our officers and colleagues from SIPFA. It's been discussed at length by Cabinet and the Financial Sustainable Working Group. Many of those members are here tonight. The plan has 3 themes. Theme 1, financial sustainability. Theme 2, service reviews. And Theme 3, governance and culture. These themes have individual work streams which tackle the areas we need to take action on. The plan will be a living document and is over 2 years, split into 6-month planning windows, with the immediate 6 months being set out in detail. While maintaining a view of the longer-term planning horizon, we must get behind this improvement plan with vigour, commitment and the determination that I know we are all capable of in this Council, officers and members alike, as this is the only way we are going to solve the financial challenges and avoid greater intervention and scrutiny by government. Next is the corporate strategy, which is incorporated into the improvement plan. The work on our corporate strategy has been developed into two parts. Part 1 is the improvement plan at pages 7 to 10 and is an 18-month tactical strategy for the period 2022 to July 23, with a focus on reaching financial sustainability. Part 2 will be developed during the first 3 to 6 months of the 2022 year and will set out the longer-term ambition and vision for the Council and our city. The first part of the strategy has 3 priorities on financial sustainability, services and governance, I should say. This strategy will be subject to consultation in the normal way and will come back for approval to this Council in March 2022 alongside approval of Phase 2 of our budget. Moving on to the next set of recommendations, which approves the appointment of an independent chair of our Audit Committee and 2 independent members, and the process by which this is achieved. These recommendations also approved an honorarium payment to the chair of £3,000 per year and £1,500 per year for the other members, as well as travelling and subsistence payments. These appointments are vital to ensure that our Audit Committee is strengthened in the way set out in the 2 independent reports. The report before you tonight also asks us to note the work being done of member training on financial scrutiny for audit and scrutiny committees, and finally asks us to note the proposal for full council to consider a report before the end of July 2022 on commencing an evaluation on moving to all-out elections every 4 years, a recommendation contained within the DLUC letter from Kemi Badenoch, the Minister. Finally, I want to cover our communication and engagement plans, which are set out in paragraph 9 of the report. By their very nature, the documents are in part technical, so we're going to ensure that whilst we distill the plans into plain English and present them as a plan on a page, we will give regular updates to residents and staff to ensure that all know that we have acted on feedback, and where we do not act, we will explain why. We will ensure that the channels we use for engagement are designed to meet those with different engagement and information needs. We have already engaged with our staff. They're helping us with our financial challenges, and I want to thank them for all their efforts and ideas, and we're already seeing a reduction in spend in this financial year, which is difficult but necessary. In closing, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would like to reiterate my thanks to all who've got us to this point where we have secure plans in place to move forward, but I'm under no illusion that this is going to be hard work in the future. It's going to be tough, and, as my colleagues know, we will not always agree. But again, I've told you, but I'm saying so in public, you have my absolute commitment to work with you all, listen genuinely to your suggestions and collaborate with you, as I recognise this is the only path to a successful future for this council and the city. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Coles, will you second the altered recommendations and either speak now or reserve your right to speak later in the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I rise from a sedentary position to second this and would like to speak now, if that's okay. As Councillor Fitzgerald has indicated, I intend to talk about past decision-making, which I covered yesterday with the Financial Sustainability Working Group and which I'd promised before in budget scrutiny. I also have a slideshow here to illustrate this, what I'm going to say to make things a little more clearer. So if we can open that, lovely, we're open on page 1. What I want to do is to start in 2018 and the situation the Council found itself in, and some of the factors which were impacting on our finances, which were as follows. Government funding had been reducing significantly since austerity measures were put in place from 2008. So that since 2013-14, our grant dropped from £55 million to £10 million. And here's a diagram to illustrate that drop and how much has been taken out of our budget. That's an 81% in central government funding. The Council was facing significant increases in its population from its growth plans and also from inward migration. We embarked on building new schools and refurbishing others to meet our statutory duty to provide school places, which increased our capital borrowing significantly, placing a strain on our capital budgets. And as you can see from this slide, since 2011, the Council has spent £836 million on its capital programme, £283 million on schools, and of that, £113.4 million came from borrowing. We also took all the council tax freeze grants that were offered to us by the MHCLG under the coalition government, as we wanted to keep council tax low for our residents who were feeling the effects of austerity. And whilst this kept council tax low, it means that we would have had an additional income of £9.1 million this year had we not accepted those grants. This next slide shows the impact of taking the council tax freeze grants over the 4 years that were illustrated. What it means for Peterborough residents is that the average council tax band B property is £131.59 lower than the average cost for all unitaries in the country. Since 2016-17, we've approved the maximum council tax raises in each successive budget. The chart shown that we could recover this money in 5 years, but, and it's a big but, we could only do this by raising council tax 2% above the maximum permitted amount. And this will be difficult to do because it would mean permission from DLUHC or by means of a referendum. And we already know that we have advice that the UHC are against that particular approach. The demographics of our city also demonstrate that we have significant needs which have to be met in our statutory services in schools, adults, children and housing. And you can see the illustration here which shows that number. In 2018, we used reserves to protect vital services to our citizens to ensure that we could respond to the significant level of needs in our city. This was done through a special reserve which was established to plug any financial gaps to protect these services and to allow us to transform. So the combination of low council tax levels, high capital borrowing, the protection of services and the use of our reserves meant that we had to consider a different course, as this approach was a certain road to a Section 114 direction and the council becoming bankrupt. Now, this diagram shows how important it is that we control our debt and maintain the reserves we have, because Peterborough has one of the higher levels of debt of all unitaries, as you can see on the chart. What we know is that councils on the right end of the graph have similar issues with their budgets and are all facing a potential of external challenge. The council has always been open to external challenge, and at the end of 2018, experts in adults and children from the LGA and Grant Thornton worked with us to help meet our financial challenges and to bring us learning from other councils to help us with those challenges. We've gained credit for our willingness to accept such challenge, and we continue to accept such challenge, as with the corporate peer challenge just this year. Through this work, we identified the need for a 3-year plan to move to financial sustainability in 2023-24. That plan had the following features. In year 1, 2019-20, it was to reduce spending and redesign some services. And that plan's year 2 in 2021, a continuance of the measures to reduce spending, allowing the council time to revise its corporate strategy and revise the medium-term financial strategy approach to create an affordable and sustainable financial position for the council. And in year 3, the proposal was, over 2021-22, adoption of the new corporate strategy, MTFS, and an introduction of the new sustainable operating model. It was on the basis of these plans and the commitment to deliver them that we were able to seek government support for our first capitalisation direction, and we would not have been able to do this had they not seen such a plan. Those plans were all articulated in the finance reports, which were going to Cabinet, Joint Scrutiny Committees and Council during this period, and they were also shared with our auditors and with government. If we had not come up with achievable plans, we would not have received additional government support. Now, the intention was to get there, but this is the progress that we made against these plans. In year 1, with considerable efforts from our staff, we were able to reduce a projected overspend of £9.5 million to a small underspend through holding vacancies and improved financial controls on spending. We also planned and had successful reductions in our agency spend, and we used benchmarking to reduce spend in some areas of high cost. We also used the work we had done with Empower, a well-recognised consultancy to help us in adult services to reduce demand through helping people to stay independent in their own homes. And we also introduced the innovative family safeguarding model, which has helped reduce the number of children in care when compared to statistical neighbours supporting children to stay in the family. Now, in year 2, 2020-21, by February 2020, thanks to the magnificent work of our staff across the organisation, we had identified the second year's measures to reduce spending by finding 11 million out of the £40 million gap for that financial year. It was planned to bring this to Council in June 2020 to enable the development of the new corporate strategy and the MTFS for year 3. We all know that these plans were thwarted by COVID-19. Although we did not give up trying to make savings, out of the £11.9 million of savings that we'd identified, we were able to include 4.3 million of these in the MTFS. We continued to review the cost-benefit analysis of the remaining proposals. Unfortunately, many of these remain undeliverable in the vastly changed context of nearly 2 years of the pandemic. The impacts of COVID placed immediate additional stress on our budgets during the 2020 and 2021 financial year, and we also planned for increased demand across several services in 21-22. As a result, we indicated to Government that we would need some further exceptional support in this financial year. The Government quite rightly wanted to review our position if they were to consider further support, hence the independent reviews which have now been published. However, thanks to the extension of COVID funding from central government, such as the Job Retention Scheme and the COVID Local Support Grant, we are now not looking for exceptional support this year. However, we are using COVID reserves to balance our budget this year and to put a moratorium on spend to reduce the reserves we use in this year. So let's move to the lessons learnt and the way forward. With hindsight, taking the council tax freeze grant and avoiding raising council tax for our residents during austerity has created a £9 million gap. But we have, since 2016-17, maximised council tax increases. There should always be extreme caution when using one-offs, such as selling assets or using reserves to balance the budget. And more determined action should have been taken to reduce capital borrowing and spend in the capital programme, with capital spend more closely aligned to managing demand and growth. Our risk attitude and approach to funding projected demand should be reviewed. Hold a higher risk corporately would mean less funding allocated to service budgets in advance of demand. The 3-year plan that I've described, which included initiatives developed by the experts from the LGA and Grant Thornton, should have restarted earlier in this financial year. For example, assets, contracts and non-statutory spend areas. More support for members to effectively challenge the Council's financial plans through audit and scrutiny on the areas that I've described. All of the above areas are tackled in the 3 themes in the improvement plan before you today, as follows. Theme 1, financial sustainability, contains work streams on the medium-term financial strategy, on our assets and on the capital programme. Theme 2, service reviews, contains work streams on the statutory spend, on approach to demand management, delivery through contracts, and reviews of adults, children's, housing and community services. And Theme 3, governance and culture, contains work streams in relation to budgeting and member support. It is vital that we approve all the recommendations today, and I am committed to continuing to work with you all on these challenges. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Brilliant. Just on 10 minutes. Okay, can I call upon any of the speakers from those here present physically to speak on this? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I should say at the beginning that we are going to be supporting this, but we can't really just allow it to go through without making any comments. So one of the things we've been asked to approve is the setting up of an improvement panel, and I'm sure those people on it are really worthy people, but I think people out there in the community may well question in our financial situation how we can justify paying people £800 on a daily basis and having an estimated bill coming to over £300,000. I appreciate we probably don't have any choice, but I think it's right that we do flag up a concern. I've taken the opportunity in preparing for this meeting to read again some of the reports that we received from SIPFA and from MHCLG, and they do come to some fairly damning conclusions about the governance and the finances of this local authority. That they talk about how Peterborough City Council's entered into a plethora of different partnerships, sharing arrangements, joint venture companies, etc. That it's actually proving quite difficult to keep track of them, and it's even got to the point that the cabinet's had to create a separate shareholder cabinet to enable it to actually keep some control over what's going on. So I think such complication leads to the possibility of inefficiencies creeping in. So I think it's good that the improvement panel is going to be having a look at that. I think it's important that we don't just agree an improvement plan, but also give some thought about how we got into this predicament, and Councillor Coles has given some thoughts on that. I think it's also important to recognise that the 81% cut in revenue support grant has made a significant contribution to the problems, and I think that's probably rather glossed over in the MHCLG report. And Councillor Coles mentioned that we took the Eric's Pickles bribe over a number of years, extra grant if we froze the council tax. But my recollection, having been here, is that we already had quite a low level of council tax even before that. And three facts need to be borne in mind with that. Having a low council tax base means that every year when the government allows you to increase council tax by only a certain percentage, you fall further and further behind. But fact number two is that the reason government doesn't want you to increase the council tax is that they know it's an unfair and regressive tax. And fact number three is that, and this has been true under both Labour and Conservative governments, that they just don't trust local authorities to actually handle their own finances, and that's partly one of the reasons why we've got one of the most over-centralised systems of government on the entire continent. And the past few years, in terms of our budgets, have seen an increasingly desperate scramble to balance the budget in a whole variety of ways, salami slicing bits off departmental budgets, planning big savings across a department and then finding you can't implement them and then having to put the money back into the budget. We've seen outsourcing of services to a variety of external companies who've largely overpromised but largely underperformed. We've seen a depletion of reserves, and the most recent thing we've seen is going to central government to actually get permission to borrow large amounts in order to enable the council to break even. Now, we've already talked about the capital programme, which I think a lot of people have recognised has become, I mentioned at the meeting last week, I saw a figure of £162 million was the projection at one point for our capital programme. And we've had council leaders over the years who have come up with a whole variety of grandiose schemes they wanted to push through, and they've said, oh, it's fine because it can be funded through capital. But what they need to realise, and what I think we are now realising, is that capital spending has revenue implications, and we're now seeing an increasingly large proportion of our budget going to pay for the capital spending. So it is really good that we are at last bringing it under control. I just wanted to briefly mention sort of asset sales, because that's something that SIPFA actually talks about in its report. Now, I think it's a good thing that if we need to build our reserves up, that selectively selling off assets to build up reserves can be a good thing. But what I did find very surprising in this SIPFA report was it seemed to be advocating that if we need to balance our budget, we need to we need to put assets up for sale in order to pay for that. But that becomes a self-defeating process, because if you put assets in to balance the budget one year, you need to put more assets in the following year. So it's not a very prudent way of managing the budget, and I'm actually quite surprised that that it's being suggested that is something that we should do. But I do think that there are assets that we could look to sell. I've always found it slightly puzzling why the council owns farms, and it actually says in the CIPFA report that the rate of return that we get from them isn't particularly good. But I think if we are going to keep them, and there are arguments for keeping them, we need to make them work harder for us. Every asset that the council owns and decides to keep must be made to work harder to deliver on our corporate objectives. So just briefly wanted to turn to the corporate strategy and the improvement plan. And I do want to exercise a word of caution, because I do have a slight problem when the corporate strategy has been developed through the Financial Sustainability Group, which meets in private. It's too important to be developed in private, and I'm actually pleased that it is now the draft is going out to public consultation. I'm grateful to Councillor Fitzgerald and Councillor Coles that he's included quite a few of the changes that we asked for in the corporate strategy. Particularly, we asked for a much higher level of profile to be given to climate change, because even though balancing the budget's the most important thing, we can't afford, if we want to get to net zero carbon by 2030, to put off effective measures to tackle climate change. So the corporate strategy is not perfect, but it has significantly improved, and so we can support it. The final thing I wanted to comment on is the government's proposal that we should change from having elections by thirds to having all-out elections once every 4 years. We've already seen the government trying to manipulate elections in their favour by changing the voting system for the mayoral elections to change it back to first past the post. They're proposing new onerous ID requirements, which we know are going to make it harder for many disadvantaged people to participate in the democratic process. And what we see now is they want to force us to have elections every 4 years, which would be fine under PR, but under first past the post, it distorts the will of the people and severely discriminates against smaller parties. So in conclusion, we didn't ask to be in this situation. The Conservatives have been running the council for 22 years now. They've been in charge of the government for almost 12. So no matter how we got here, it's quite clear who must take the blame for the predicament that we're actually in. But having said that, it's important that we all work together to find a way forward. And I can commit that the Liberal Democrat group is committed to playing a full and active role in that process.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I've got Councillor Joseph and then Councillor Day after that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Coles, for your presentation. It was interesting that it was worded that we found ourselves in this situation in 2018. Perhaps it was a surprise to you because Councillor Seaton, the former Finance Cabinet member, had constantly told us about how rosy everything was in the garden and how wonderfully prudent the financial strategies of the Conservative administration were, and how they were doing everything to make sure that the city was running smoothly. And now it seems that not only have we faced bankruptcy in 2018, it is only by the sterling efforts of this administration that we have found ourselves in this more positive situation. But really, while it may have been a balanced budget, as has been proven by the slides, the level of debt is so high, higher than many other councils, and actually borrowing merely to plug the gaps may have balanced the budget, but certainly is not sustainable. We've been told that we are all accountable for the faults that have led us to this particular situation, and that, in fact, we are guilty, the opposition, because we haven't brought any ideas to the table. Well, if that is the case, then surely all the ideas that have come to the table have come from the administration, and therefore it is your fault that we are where we find ourselves. But let's examine that statement. We haven't brought anything to the table, apparently. We have brought, in fact, it was the Labour leader that brought forward the HRA. This was at least 5 years ago that this was first mentioned. And it's taken 5 years for this administration to dilly-and-dally forward to actually bring the HRA into being. But now we have no money to spend on building council houses because of the moratorium. And therefore, more and more people will be faced to pay private rents of 25 to 33% more. People who are suffering from low wages and zero hours, therefore suffering child poverty and having to use food banks, things that have increased rapidly under this administration and their government. And let us be honest about it, it's not people on benefits that have fallen into child poverty and food banks. It is working people that are having to resort to these things merely to feed their children and to live from week to week. Working people, not people on benefits. Only last week we had motions on bonds, which is also a Labour idea, and we also had the cultural strategy, something else which we also brought forward, I believe, in our 2019 manifesto and have brought before Council before. So it's not true to say that we have never brought ideas to the table, but when they are adopted, all of a sudden, they are not other people's ideas. So we also had a list of cuts that have been brought forward recently that have had to go into phase one of the budget, which apparently are, in fact, the ideas of officers and not the administration. So perhaps it begs the question that perhaps one of the easy ways to save 150k a year would be to actually suspend the Cabinet, because apparently they're neither bringing ideas to the table or anything else of any value. But perhaps, considering who we have for a Prime Minister, that's not really surprising. Here is a man who stands and claps the NHS and praises them for saving his life and uses those very same hands to vote in a 3% pay budget for the NHS workers, the average of which is £1,000 a year. When they take off the tax and NI, they barely have enough left to buy him a roll of wallpaper for his flat. This is a disingenuity of our Prime Minister, which cannot fail to peter down to the members of his administration in this city. And that's perhaps why we had a bulky waste reintroduction just prior to an election, which obviously will not be carried on because we don't have any money for it next year. And let us not forget that all of this talk of conciliation and working together and, you know, the Financial Sustainability Working Group, it is a working group. It can come up with ideas, but ultimately it is the administration that has the right to push these ideas forward. So they can not take on board any ideas, or they can offer to white label them and take them on as their own. They're unable to accept it as their own financial inadequacy that has brought this city to its knees. For many of you who are fans of Only Fools and Horses, you'll remember the story of Trigger's brush. Trigger had the same brush for 20 years. It had 17 new heads and 14 handles, but it was the same brush. And this administration is just like that brush. It has new leaders and some new members, but it's the same brush with the same ideas, and this city deserves better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joseph. Councillor Day, and then I've got Councillor Jones next.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. The Greens wish to thank officers, members, the leader, the CEO and our directors who have worked together to create such a prompt reaction and response to the SIPFA and Andrew Lockhart reports, and for pulling together plans for the way forward and hopefully out of the precarious position we find ourselves in. In Appendix 4 of the corporate strategy on page 6, it states that we need a shared commitment by all members in full council, strong and decisive leadership by Cabinet, constructive and well-informed scrutiny, and inquisitive and challenging audit in order to fulfil its ambitions for the city and its duties to the public. We as Greens completely agree with this statement, and we have been told that this is all of our responsibility. However, it is difficult to be fully responsible or feel fully responsible when we have not been responsible for financial and budget decisions in the past and we didn't know the extent of the problems. Turning to the CIPFA report on page 3, it states, a new administration has been formed apparently with a new determination and willingness to resolve the financial situation by taking difficult decisions. This is very welcome, but it's interesting the use of the word apparently. The word apparently the word apparently means as far as one knows or can see. We were often told by the previous Cabinet Member for Finance that services were provided at low unit costs, and we had no reason to question this. In contrast, the CIPFA report states on page 12 that this is not completely borne out by the comparisons of 2019-20. On page 13, the return spend in individual services, table 1, children's services spending is above average, housing services and planning and development services are in the highest quartile, central services are the second highest of all comparator councils. I'm not sure who was misleading who, but we certainly weren't being told that at the time. On page 29, the CIPFA report states, in our view, it is clear that the Council has failed to take sufficiently, timely and extensive action to resolve the Council's financial difficulties. After the external auditor's opinion of November 2020, the Council's Cabinet should have been focused on taking action. CIPFA goes on to say, since then a new administration was formed in May 21 and our interviews led us to the view that the new Cabinet and leader are determined to deal with the issue, but we were concerned that since the new administration was elected in May, we have had no evidence that any overarching crisis management mechanisms have been put in place at Cabinet level. I'm assuming now that the Financial Scrutiny Working Group are one of these mechanisms, and I question whether without the CIPFA report would this have happened. So we've not only seen failings of leadership and Cabinet level, but also throughout the whole of the scrutiny committees, particularly in this case the Audit Committee. On page 29, CIPFA states again, the Council has an Audit Committee that meets quarterly. We were concerned at the lack of rigorous challenge displayed by the committee. It is clear that it doesn't say not some or a little, but no attempts were made to challenge the developing issue over a sustained period, and that the committee was willing to agree to the statement of accounts and the detail of the financial position developing as presented without seeking an explanation as to comprehensive corrective action and monitoring its achievement. Now, we don't have any Greens on the Audit Committee, and I'm hoping that may change in the future, but it's clear that that committee needs strengthening. The corporate strategy states, we will only have to change the organisation if we are clear on what has to change, by when and to what standard. I think it's quite clear some of the things that need to change and the high standards that we need going forward. Having said all of this, and I did say that I would be critical, in the spirit of moving forward and collaboration, the Greens welcome the improvement plan and corporate strategy. We welcome the opportunity we have had on the Financial Sustainability Working Group to input and edit that plan. We welcome the measures to improve skills and training, and we welcome the vision to change the governance and culture. We will play a full part in such transformation. It is residents who will feel the impacts of service cuts and council tax rises, and we do and will work hard not only for the residents that elected us, but also for the residents across the entire city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Day. I've got Councillor Jones and then Councillor Allen straight after.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of relatively small but meaningful points, but Trigger's brush analogy will stay with me for a long time. On page 28 of the CIPFA report, it states the Council has a plethora of arrangements and then goes on to list milestone, MPS, etc., etc. The improvement plan states on page 15, allows the Council to look to develop a new operating models for its servicing, moving away from the initial silo-based approach. My question, moot point, is to what extent has over-segmentation, potentially driven by political ideology, led to the administration being unable to see the bigger picture and direction of travel that has led us here today? And in saying that, I mean, one of the things I've benefited from, and I think it was picked up by Councillor Day, is that in a spirit of collaboration, reports like this that lays everything out and allows us to see the bigger picture, where we're not operating in silos, will make a huge difference, I think. And also, as Councillor Fitzgerald said, the plan on a page is something that we can actually relate to and explain to people, and that will help us all going forward. The only other two things is the setting up of a HRA account, which was unthinkable for the administration politically a short time ago, is described as a specific risk where 0.5 to 0.6 billion is not budgeted. This was clearly not factored in. And it would be interesting to know what lessons have been learnt for this. Was it done in the interests of political expediency? And finally, the agreement we had with TACT, the 10-year agreement, was it in any way risk assessed? And we could be liable for a settlement of costs. So in a couple of instances, we don't want to avoid any fools rushing in where angels fear to tread in the future. Thank you.
Sorry, Richard, I didn't catch that. Councillor Seresti, you have a point of order?
No, I have no point of order. I would like to speak, if I'm allowed to, at some point.
Once we've had the people who are physically present here, once they've spoken, then I'm going to open the meeting up to those sitting at home.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Deputy Mayor, actually. Okay, I've got Councillor Allen and then Councillor Hogg straight afterwards.
You got a quick promotion, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Am I good to go now?
Yes, Councillor Allen.
Thank you so much. In the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, I didn't raise a point of accuracy whilst Councillor Joseph was speaking, because I thought it important that the oxygen of all points of view are expressed this evening. But I can clarify the fact that Peterborough City Council have indeed had a culture strategy for some time. What I recently presented was a reinforced, refreshed and revised strategy, and I'm pleased that the Council did accept that. All members, I believe, supported that option. So we did have a culture strategy, and we've now got a better one round the corner. With regard to HRA, I am on record as being a protagonist of that outcome, and whilst I hold the portfolio, I will work towards that. It's unfortunate that it's not going ahead at the moment, but let me say that this council recognised the need for affordable housing, and in that respect we have Cross Keys doing a sterling job, and also the Meadsham vehicle. So that is in hand. So I just wanted to clarify it, a kind of a statement of accuracy, if I may, in hindsight, or at least after the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So I'm not going to kind of come up with a huge speech. I think my colleague to my left has set out quite a lot of the thinking in terms of the Liberal Democrat group, and we've heard from Labour colleagues as well, quite in depth. And I just wanted to pick up maybe a few bits and pieces that I feel that maybe haven't been covered. But before I do that, I do want to say, a big thank you, really, to, the work that's been done with the FSWG. The fact that tonight, there were papers brought out, we raised some concerns, and officers worked tirelessly behind the scenes to get work done to a place where we felt that we could support. And I think, I really thank people for getting that done, and it engenders, a feeling that, that we're being listened to, the fact that we are all working together, and it does show a direction of travel which is highly encouraging. So I do really want to put that on record, that, we are very grateful for that situation, and that, I do feel that we are pulling together. I'm not sure that we're quite there yet, but I think, you know, we have got a direction of travel, and it does seem to be working relatively well. I just wanted to point out just a couple of things. First of all, the financial implications on page 19, 11.1. We've got that the Audit Committee panel, independent chair and members, 4 years, £24,000 financial implication. Hopefully, I've got some good news here. Presumably, that's going to be offset by the 7,500 SRA that is currently paid to the chairman of that committee. We're not going to have two chairs of that committee, so that SRA presumably will fall away. I then have to call into question the fact that if we've got a chair running a committee on a £3,000 allowance, that maybe this is the time to start looking at maybe some of the SRAs for other chairs of committees. You know, we are up against the wall. We are looking at, you know, where we can save £1,000 from here and £1,000 from there. So I think that that's something definitely that needs to be put back onto the table. That maybe some of the committee chairs from other committees may have their allowances squeezed somewhat. I think that in terms of moving swiftly on, the challenges that we have is that, you know, one of the issues that has been brought up in the reports is the fact that, you know, we are 60 councillors and we all need to take responsibility for the finances, and it's been identified that training is definitely something that needs to be up so that, you know, councillors are able to up their game in terms of knowledge, etc., etc. And I think there's also a challenge that we need to do, and that is to make the reports that councillors are given, the decision makers, etc., are easier to read and easier to understand. I think that there's a very big barrier there. I have, you know, this is a drum that I've beat before, and I will continue to beat that drum until we get reports that are much easier to understand, are framed in such a way so that all 60 councillors are able to look at these documents and able to understand them. And more importantly, members of the public. You know, these are public documents, and I think that, you know, the institutions are very, we're one of those, you know, fall into using jargon and making things as succinct as possible. But actually, we actually need to make them more understandable so that people can understand what we're, you know, why decisions are being made, what the financial implications of those are. So I think that, you know, the documentation that we put out needs to be very closely looked at as a key thing going forward. And then just lastly, I just wanted to kind of make a comment about the selling of assets. It doesn't sit well for me, the fact that we have assets that potentially could be giving a good rate of return in terms of their value. If we are to look to sell these to boost our reserves, what kind of interest are we going to get for the money to be sitting in a bank? It doesn't seem financially right, and I think we need to push back quite hard to make sure that the assets that we do sell are ones that aren't performing particularly well, but the ones that are performing relatively well, we need to make the case that they are essentially reserves in the fact that they are assets that could be sold at any time, that we don't necessarily need to have to sell them straight away. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. I've got Councillor Nawaz next.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I want to make reference to the CIPFA report for two reasons, really. The first one is it takes me a lot longer than 10 minutes to make a speech on that, because there's a lot of information there that needs to be shared with the public. And secondly, I anticipate some of our online members will make some comments about that report. But Wayne, I thought tonight was going to be your Churchill moment, and you were going to open with, "I have nothing to offer but blood, sweat, toil and tears." and you missed that opportunity, really. Yeah, next week. But at least you were gracious enough to thank opposition members for their support. And as you know, it has been difficult because obviously in the past things haven't quite worked out. But we are trying again, and I hope the start that we're going to make tonight and the start we've made on the Financial Sustainability Working Group demonstrates our commitment to the people of this city. But I think when you sum up later on, you've done a good job thanking opposition members, thanking our hard-working staff, because I know they have been working hard. I also feel and believe you owe an apology to the people of Peterborough, because going forward, that we are going to take certain decisions like closing theatres, libraries, other non-statutory duties and responsibilities, which is going to make life hard for some people. And that's not a good situation to be in. Councillor Coles, you started your talk or presentation or speech by starting the analysis from 2018. And I'm sure that was done with good intention, but I think you're slightly shortchanging everybody here tonight, because I think that analysis needs to go further back. The problem didn't start in 2018. The problem started a lot earlier, 2010 at best, but really prior to that. And so I think at some point, you may want to go that far back just to understand the exact issues that arose. In terms of the schools, I think, again, I'm sure you'll agree to some extent, Councillor Coles, although you and I weren't councillors at that time, the administration at the time got the numbers wrong. So there was possibly some mismanagement, possibly some incompetence that led to us not being able to fully understand how many children we had at the time and how many schools we should have had. And that's why we had to spend so much money in terms of building more schools. And I also think, and I'm sure you'll agree to some extent, Wayne, that this administration, as in this Conservative group, should have pushed their party government harder in prior years to say we need more funding. And there were some attempts made, but obviously, in hindsight, obviously everybody's the smartest person on earth. But I think you should have made harder attempts, but now your leader, I'm hoping you'll be having regular communication and making it very clear to them that the situation we find ourselves in is partly their fault, and if we learn any lessons, Councillor Coles, then the lesson is that austerity does not work. And that's where the problem is, because I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time on talking about all the issues that I've talked about previously in terms of academic or lack of academic achievement, literacy rates, and all the other things, Empower. But what is a real bugbear of mine is we spent millions of pounds with Grant Thornton, and I think at least on 2 occasions, if not more, I asked at full council, are we getting value for money? Okay, we're having some benchmarking done, we're having some financial modelling done, and the then cabinet member for resources said we're spending something like £2.7 million or thereabouts, and we're going to save 10, 15, 20 million pounds. So this is the best investment we've ever made. And I'm yet to see those savings, Councillor Coles. So I'm hoping you'll be able to go back to the findings from Grant Thornton to deliver those savings, because it's incredibly important that we make sure we make best use of those funds. I also think it's important for us, because if we want to look forward, is to look at where we've got high spend, whether it's agency costs, use of contractors, subcontractors, making best use of our assets, of our contracts, be it with Serco or elsewhere. I know we've already started on the capital programme. It's important we look at those things with a fine-tooth comb to ensure that we are as efficient as we can be. And in the past, Wayne, you'll recall, I did mention we need to look at other ways of generating income. And you stood up quite proud and loud and said, Councillor Nawaz, you don't fully understand how council works. We're generating about, I think, 80 or 82 or 84 million pounds every single year, and that's a lot of money that this council is generating. But had you paid a bit more attention, perhaps, and said, fair point, Councillor Nawaz, maybe we should look at attempting to possibly generate more income, that may have helped us to some extent. But now we find ourselves in a very, very difficult situation. And that's why we've come forward, and although it's not been easy, we have decided that it's only fit, right and proper that the Labour group works with all parties on the council to make sure that we do not have a situation where the commissioners come in and take over this council and then obviously cancel all non-statutory duties, because the amount of pain, hardship the people of Peterborough will have to go through will be something that none of us could forgive ourselves, because we all, to some extent, became councillors to make people's lives better. That's the intention. And I firmly believe, no matter which party anybody is from, everybody still tries to do that. But unfortunately, sometimes that gets lost in translation. Scrutiny, I think, needs to change, Wayne, and if we're going to work together on the Financial Sustainability Working Group, I think we need to also work together on scrutiny in terms of how those meetings are chaired and which members chair those meetings, because partly, to some people, by the way, it seems as though opposition members are being asked to work together on the FSWG group, but when it comes to having some of the other roles, we're being shortchanged. So that's, I don't need you to answer that tonight, Wayne, but that's something that you may want to think about and have a conversation with Nick, Julie, Nicola, Arcia, and myself and Christian Hogg at some point in the future. Another part of the problem, Councillor Coles, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is you can't solve the problems with the same thinking that the problems were created with. And that is a crucial question in terms of, is the Conservative administration, which has been in charge for the last 21 odd years, fit to run this council going forward? And that's a question that I will answer at some point in the future. But I think we need to look at remodeling our services, bringing some of those back in-house, and I know that's not Conservative ideology, but it's been proven time and again that certain services, when brought in-house, are run better. We need to look at more innovative models for delivering our core services, and I think we need to be ahead of the game. We talk a good game, but we need to deliver. So we all know that in the next 25 to 40 years, 50 years even, robotics, artificial intelligence, digital innovation is going to be big. And we have high aspirations in this city, and we want Peterborough to be the best city in the country. There's no doubt about that. So I think we need to start changing the way that we think about things. I think there's been too much short-term thinking, and again, those members who've been councillors alongside me for the last 4 or 5 years and longer would have heard me ask questions to cabinet members or the finance member about, let's not think about next year and the year after. What about year 3? What about year 5? What about year 10? And those questions were gone unheard, but I hope going forward now we'll pay more attention to that, because this situation isn't just about the next 2 years. The next 2 years are hard, but if we make the right decisions and think about things over the next 5, 10, 15 years, I think then we're going to be able to put this council in a much better situation. So just to sum up, Councillor Coles, I think the lessons learned from my point of view are austerity doesn't work. We need much better planning. We need long-term thinking. We need to remodel the way we work our services. We need to reinvent how this particular council works, and we need to find a better way of working together. Because if we do that, one thing is for sure, no one person or party has ownership of good or great ideas. But if we work together collectively, as far as we can, I think we're going to have a much better council. And I've got some comments on the corporate strategy but I'll share those on the FSWG. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
I don't have any more names for anyone here present before I open up, so is there anyone who'd like to speak before I open it up to virtual? No? In that case, Councillor Tresti, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just really to clarify some of the things that have been said. Obviously, everybody has a slant, or shall we say the opposition has a slant on, let's blame the Conservatives for everything that's happened, which is clearly not true. And Councillor Nawaz says, oh, well, it's no good going back to 2018, let's go back to 2010. Well, I could just as easily say, let's go back to the previous Labour government and let's start there. But that becomes even more political than Councillor Nawaz was trying to make it. So, but we all know where I'm going and we all know what I'm saying. This started when it started and we went through austerity and what have you. And to actually say that the administration and the education department in our city didn't know how many children we had in the city is a complete, well, that's not quite right either. What is absolutely right is that we had one of the highest birth rates in the entire country. And if it wasn't the highest birth rate, it was in the top 5 or whatever. Even Hampton is an example of where everybody was taken by surprise by the birth rates in Hampton, and it is what it is. People get married, they love each other. They don't get married, they love each other, and they have babies. And babies grow up, and they need schools. And actually, what should happen is the Conservative administration should be applauded for spending 800 and something odd million pounds on upgrading existing schools and building the new schools that were necessary, and getting 700 million pounds of that money or thereabouts back from government. So, let's be well balanced about what really happened. This was a huge improvement in our schools, in the delivery of places for our children, and it has made, in my opinion, it's been a tremendous success. Now, let's just go on a minute to the SIPFA report, and I think the interesting bit about the SIPFA report, it only picks out the bits where we spend more than our comparator councils. Which is fine, because I assume they were brought in because we have a problem, we have to balance the books, and they came in to try and find where the issues were. So of course they turn around and say, well, it's this and that and the rest of it, and at the end of their table 1 under Appendix 1, they're saying that we are overspent by £17,169,820. But of course, what Councillor Day, for whom I have a huge amount of respect for, didn't pick out, and what I've noticed that no one else has bothered to pick out either, is all of the other voices, like education, where we deliver an excellent service, and we deliver it at less cost than our comparators. Highways and transport, exactly the same. Adult social care, exactly the same. So we actually, if you take the table and if you look at what we actually spend to deliver services compared to our comparators, the council delivers all of the same services actually for 53 million, give or take £1 million, less than our other comparator councillors. So, if you like numbers, those are real numbers. Now, I didn't make them up. SIPFA delivered them, which just means that we are delivering services in our city same standard, but for a heck of a lot less than the cost that our comparators are spending. And what the question then needs to be is, well, and I did put this to the SIPFA team, well, if that's the case, and it's their numbers, so they can't argue their numbers, if that is the case, is it not clear that this council has been dramatically underfunded for many years when it should have been funded much more closer to the average than it ever has been? And is it not the case that growth in our community is never funded within the right amount of time for us to be able to deliver the services in the way that all of us would like to? Because I actually, you know, I agree with Councillor Nawaz. We were all elected to look after our communities, you know, our wards and the people who live in them. There's no other point in being elected. If you don't want to do that, you shouldn't be a councillor. So, you know, it's all very well we pick out this is wrong and that is wrong, and, you know, and they got that wrong and got that wrong, and, you know, let's blame the Conservatives, and we should start in 2010. But if we're going to start in 2010, why can't we start in 2000 or, you know, 1998? What, you know, what's the difference? So all I'm trying to say is make the point that actually look at what SIPFA have done, which they have completely ignored, but look at the table in Appendix 1, Table 1, comparison of service costs per head, 2019 and 20, and you will see that the Peterborough administration delivers similar services to our comparators for over £50 million less than they spend. And therefore, the question we all need to ask is, why don't we have the money? Why have we lost so much money from our government grants, etc., 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 when we are such an efficient and well-run and financially well-managed organisation? Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Chesty. I've got Councillor Yassin and then Councillor Murphy afterwards. Councillor Yassin, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Keep it very brief because a lot of what I wanted to say has been covered already. Of course, we find ourselves in a really sensitive situation, and at a time like this, we all need to kind of pull together and work together. But having said that, I can't sit here and ignore the fact that the reason why we are in this mess is because there has been 2 decades of poor management, poor decision making, and an incompetence of the Conservative administration. Now, Councillor Soreste says that we haven't been getting enough funding, but some would say that we have a huge asset in this city, who is Paul Bristow, our Conservative MP. So why can't he lobby to central government to get some more money for the city and for the people of Peterborough? Again, in 2001 to 2016, we saw a council tax freeze. That means we did not get enough funding in comparison to our sister authorities. So the funding that would have been coming in and the capital that would have been coming in from that council tax would mean that we had a much less gap to bridge. And also, as my colleague Councillor Shaz Nawaz has already eloquently put in regards to the investment, as I'd like to call it, with Grant Thornton's, we are still yet to see the difference that's going to make in our budget. And yet again, not really by choice, but we are about to make a huge investment into this independent panel. So I really hope that we take on board all the points that come from this panel and act upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yassin. I've got Councillor Murphy and then Councillor Wiggin next.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Earlier on, you asked whether we wanted to accept the document that was sent out this afternoon. Perhaps I should have raised it there because I'm not sure whether we had enough notice on that one. And in that document, it does say on page 7 that the panel will meet in private. I hope that's not literal, because I hope some of their meetings are transparent and in public. We will see, if you look at Peterborough Investment Partnership, joint venture companies, etc., there's really no detail. They're saying they don't know what they're doing or have been doing. And I think a lot of that is because of the lack of transparency. So I do hope that on occasion, the principles, the known principles of government are applied, and we do, like central government, have meetings in public. Nobody has blamed the residents tonight because it is not their mess. This council has not been efficient and effective with its resources. I'd also like to speak about the context as well, the capital programme and other things. Just before this meeting started, we had a cabinet member decision notice to say the Key Theatre will close in January and the Leisure Centre in Warrington will close to the public from the 1st of January. So the public are having to pay. The context is, in Deeping, South Kesteven District Council, I think it is, just announced they're refurbishing and redeveloping their leisure centre. Other things that we've seen that we've lost over the year, the brown bins, which were helping reduce landfill, they have gone. Yeah, in Finland, they're still carrying on. I think Councillor Jones' point about the tool, the same tool, and just changing the head is a really pertinent point. We need to change these tools and we need to consider doing things better. Now, last July, I think it was, I put forward a motion to council for the remuneration panel to have a look at the special responsibility allowances and maybe consider a reduction. We weren't meeting in public, they weren't doing the job. I think we need to cut our cloth as a council as well. The situation is critical, and the report that we've had recently, which was prepared in November in the main, only this week we've seen inflation at 5.1%, retail price inflation nearing 10%. That's going to make the context and the situation even worse. So the administration really need to come up with some proposals to make the budget fit and not to overspend. And I wonder whether they're actually going to be able to do it. Others have talked about Grant Thornton and Invest to Save. Money we've spent to make savings, and we haven't actually realised those savings. On many occasions, the administration have wasted that money. I can look at some examples. We've bought the old Woolworth building, which is technically flawed, and it's closed. We're going to close the Key Theatre. We've closed half the library. We've got assets, and we should use those assets. Having them empty and making people redundant to keep them empty isn't efficient and effective use of those assets. The community centres in my ward that haven't been closed permanently are not actually open to the public. They're open for one or two groups. That's not an efficient and effective use of a building. Like I said before, we need to do a proper base budget review, and we need to look at what we're spending money on, what our income is, and what we can do better. So let's see where we go from here, but bear in mind that what you are going to agree tonight will have severe consequences on the people of Peterborough. That tool I talked about, it seems to be a tool of short-termism to get through to the next election rather than planning for 2, 3, 4 years. As Councillor Noaz pointed out, we need to plan for the medium term, and we need to look at our assets, not with a view just to dispose of them. I mean, I did question previously why we were spending money on the town hall to lease it out to somebody who may not actually be making use of it, and why we moved to the new buildings. We speculated. We were talking about we'll grow our way out of trouble. What we've done is wasted money on much of that growth and lost that money, and you've caused us, and the residents of Peterborough, who I'm here to represent for Ravensthorpe, we've caused them even more trouble. Some of the short-sighted closures of our prevention services, the Sure Start centres, etc., have just along the line cost us more in intentions from social workers and so on and so forth. So can we take a holistic look at what services we want to provide? Since we became a union authority, we've lost so much, and it looks as though now we're seeing those buildings go on the embankment, like the Key Theatre. I don't know what's going to happen to the regional pool. I think it's got about 3 or 4 years life in it. I don't know what we're going to do then, but we do need to look at how we're going to provide services for the people of Peterborough. Thank you.
Councillor Jones, you have a point of order?
It's a point of accuracy, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Murphy, but Trigger's brush belongs to Councillor Joseph, believe me. I wish I'd come up with it, but, you know, I'm not taking that one from him.
Councillors, can I also remind you that the guillotine falls at 7:45, where we're going to have to make a decision if we're going to extend the meeting. So please, could you make your point pertinently, quickly, so we can get more and more speakers in. I've got Councillor Wiggin next, and then Councillor Hemraj.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So there's been quite a lot of talk about 2010 tonight, and actually a lot of the situation we're in at the moment reminds me of that. So we had a government that didn't fix the roof when the sun was shining and then ran unsustainable deficits when the world went to a difficult place. Then we got a document showing how bad things are. So there was a note in 2010 saying there's money left. We've got a bit longer report from SIPFA this time. Then parties came together to look at fixing the problem. And then there was a Lib Dem leader called Nick, one of which has lasted a lot longer than the other. So, as I said at the last full council meeting, I'd like to thank the leader and the cabinet for their continued commitment to openness and transparency in this process, and for allowing me to be a part of the Financial Sustainability Working Group, which has been a fascinating, if somewhat terrifying, experience. I'd also like to thank the officers for taking on board the changes we put forward to the documents, which is hugely appreciated. And that includes a commitment to review all of our governance structures, which I think is important in helping us plan for the future. And also I'd like to thank the officers for their work on changing the way the constitutional change for tonight was brought forward at quite short notice. So I think it's a fundamental principle that full council should be the body to decide on changes to the constitution. It should not be done by officers from the council, it should be given to full council to approve. So it's good that alternative voices are finally being listened to on the council, which hasn't been the case in previous years. And I hope by approving these plans tonight, the spirit of cooperation and goodwill that has been established this year between the parties will be allowed to continue for the benefit of all of our residents, now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiggin. I've got Councillor Hemraj and then Councillor Ansar Ali.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Going to the page 18 of the SIPRA report, for adult social care, the pressures include higher numbers of mental health act assessments, 30% higher increase of contracts for new clients. The list goes on, but at the bottom of it, which says we have recommended them for more detailed study. Well, what's that detailed study going to include? Is it going to be that we provide the bare minimum statutory services to our vulnerable residents, and those residents that do need some help actually won't get it because they won't meet the needs of that services? And also, as an East Ward councillor, I'm very frustrated because I represent one of the most deprived areas in our city, and I've been campaigning to get works done on Saxon Road, the pavements. I've been working with the officers to repair the curbs and the pavements there. That's very unlikely that that's going to happen due to the mismanagement of our Conservative administration over the 21 years. So yet again, our poor deprived residents, those that live in the most deprived areas, are going to not benefit from these cuts. They are going to see most of the worst cuts ever, and yet other parts of Peterborough are actually going to be better prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemraj. I've got Councillor Ali and I've got no more speakers after that, in which case I'm going to ask Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Coulson, yeah, I think it is you. Yeah, Councillor Ali, Councillor Ansar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. may I say you're doing an excellent job chairing this meeting.
You can have 5 minutes extra for that.
I'm not going to repeat what colleagues have already said. As you know, I was elected for North Ward in 2016, and I can assure you that there's no one in North Ward who is applauding the Conservative administration, simply because we have seen a nil investment in North Ward in Millfield. It is one of the most deprived areas, and with all these cuts that we are proposing, the hardest hit are going to be many people living in my North Ward and other urban areas. Some of the affluent areas are not going to be suffering as much. And I think it is this inequality that we need to address as well. We need to make sure that when we are making those cuts and we are making those challenging decisions, and I accept that the council is in a very difficult situation through no fault of many of the councillors sitting in this meeting tonight, but certainly I think we have to accept some of the bad decisions that have been made. Austerity hasn't helped at all, and there has certainly, our colleagues who have been running the council for the past 21 years or so, the Conservative colleagues, have to take some blame for it, some responsibility for the mess that we find ourselves in. I would say that, we need to work together. I welcome that. But I think, when good ideas emerge, the past recent experience, the ownership of those good ideas somehow has been manipulated to be the Conservative colleagues. Let's work together for the benefit of our residents, our communities who have elected us, who work so hard, who are going through so many difficulties at this moment in time, that we owe it to them. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ansari.
I've got Ian and Karen.
Sorry, what was that? Joe? Okay. Councillor Fitzgerald, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I don't know where to start, really. There were so many interesting comments. So I'll try and be as nice as I can. What I will pledge, I won't raise any of this again if you promise not to. So let's everybody's getting all this off their chest. So if I get what I've got off my chest, and you've all said what you've got to said, we can all move forward. But let me deal with a couple of quick points. So, Councillor Yazin, you made some reference about Grant Thornton and the outcomes. Well, it's all clearly laid out, by the way, so you just need to ask for the documents. And they'll all be in reports that Gillian, if she's got time before she leaves, that she might be able to do that. But if you talk about funding, let me just remind you that Paul Bristow has brought £20 million of LUF funding to this council just in the last couple of months. We've also been successful in bringing this Conservative administration £25 million with other funding that goes with it, almost £50 million in Towns Fund money. And if you want to talk about MPs, let's talk that the previous two MPs were Labour, one of those costing the taxpayer £500,000. So before we go off and criticise MPs, one should look to their own house. Councillor Murphy, no meetings of our dealings with intercompany or other parties that we either own or we have agreements with are held in private. The Shareholder Cabinet Committee is a public meeting of which Councillor Allen chairs, and I chaired previously, because the administration recognised itself probably 3 years ago that we needed better scrutiny of the arrangements between our own companies and our own partners. So that was in place some time ago. We didn't need anybody to point that out. And by the way, the SIP for people aren't saying there's anything wrong. They just think that these things need examining, and we agree with that. But we have a process in which we do that. Councillor Murphy, to continue, brown bins, or the lack of them, or collection of them, is down to a driver shortage. As Councillor Simons has explained no end of times, and we have to prioritise what we collect in terms of the waste. And let's be perfectly clear, because I notice you go on about it. Nobody in this council is blaming residents, but maybe that's your new election slogan. I'm not entirely sure. But nobody is blaming residents. We all do our best, as we all attested to earlier, about what we try and do for our residents. So right or wrong. Councillor Day, Marco tried to touch on it for you, but the differences are apples and apples and pears. So the way that SIPFA are looking at how they make comparisons in the cost of services is either apples and apples or apples and pears. So the SIPFA method is apples and pears. Our officers believe it should be apples and apples in terms of statistical neighbours. So whilst they've pointed those things out, it doesn't necessarily make it true. But if it is true, then we will need to do something about it. And that deep dive that, or zero-based budgeting, as Councillor Murphy has referred to, despite me giving him the answer at the last council meeting, is taking place. So everything is being taken back to the start. But I think we have to understand that we all have to be on the same page of we're on statistical neighbours and SIPFA are on another model of comparison. So I hope that our team, it's the officers that are defending...
Councillor Fitzgerald, Councillor Murphy, you've got your hand up. Is this a point of order?
Yes, it's a point of accuracy. Councillor Fitzgerald said that the meetings took place in public. He was referring to the Cabinet shareholders meeting. I was referring to the meetings of Measham Homes, Peterborough Investment Partnership and all the others that don't take place in public.
We are represented on those boards, so as council representatives, but they are private limited companies. There's no requirement for them to take. But I'm happy to take your point of information, Councillor, for clarity. So let's get back to the apples and pears. So that work, and it may have come out in the last week or so. I haven't been updated, or we haven't been updated. The Financial Sustainability Working Group has not been updated with the outcome of those investigations by SIPFA. So, Councillor Sanford refers to facts. I think Marco also referred to versions of the truth, as it were. Facts. It's a view of Councillor Sanford that's his view of the facts. I have a different view of the facts. Councillor Wiggin made reference to a different view of the facts in terms of where we are and who was in charge of what and when. But facts are, I don't recall anybody in council ever saying, oh no, we shouldn't put up council tax, or we should put up council tax, or we should cut these services. To be perfectly blunt, and we've been chucking, some rocks tonight, the Liberal Democrats have constantly argued for more spending at budget. I'm not going to dwell on that, because that is a fact, and we all know it's a fact, where the Conservative administration has been trying to keep a lid on costs and keep budget down in order to stay within our envelope. So it's not quite that clear, as you said. But, I don't want to look back too much. We're all looking forward to fixing our financial challenges. So, Councillor Joseph, top marks for you tonight. I think we'd all give you a very good clap for your analogy. But let me give you another only fools and horses analogy. Did we dodge a bullet by not getting Grandad, other than known as Jeremy Corbyn? Because both the chandeliers would have been on the ground if the Labour Party had been running this country instead of Conservatives in the last 10 or 12 years. So let's be careful with the only fools and horses analogies.
Well, a point of accuracy, Mr Mayor. That's supposition. He has no way of knowing what Jeremy Corbyn would have brought to the table, so I think he should stick to facts and not his own supposition of
well, Councillor Fitzgerald.
The facts are...
Leave him alone.
The facts are that Trigger is a fictional character and it never really happened in real life. So if we want to talk about facts and brushes. Anyway, Shaz, look, turning to you. Look, I'm happy to apologise and accept my part, our part, in any mistakes in the past. as long as you and others are prepared to do the same. Because nobody is perfect, and we come back to the fact that nobody in the administration has deliberately set out to do things bad or make wrong decisions. We are advised, okay? We are advised, and we can all sit and point the finger, but I don't want to do that. You know, fine, if, that's why I'm saying, let's park this here tonight. We have aired it. One of the points, sorry, Councillor Day, you made reference to SIPFA and what's not happened since the year. I'll be able to speak more about that in terms of if there is criticism as the weeks unfold now. But it is not entirely accurate that we did nothing. There has been moratoriums, there's been squeezes on spending, budgets have been frozen, things have been put in place other than the Financial Sustainability Working Group. But you must recall, you know, I think I took over and formed the Cabinet at the beginning of June, more or less, because we were late in the year, and we went straight into a peer challenge, and we've been in non-stop review for the last 6 months, and also trying to get underneath the skin, because Andy's a new Cabinet member, new leader, get under the skin of the financial position that we face and find a way forward. So, but I will talk more, Councillor Day, about that. I just can't do that tonight, as to your particular comment there. So, Shaz, have you been reading my emails, by the way? You must have been, because I've already had and have intense discussions with both Stephen Barclay about AI and robotics. I've had conversations with Ross Renton at the university about developing AI and robotics. And so I better check my email that you've not been at it. So these conversations, so I want to be clear here, it's great, great minds think alike. But you see, you come up with things, and I'm just a small criticism, you say things like, you know, but I don't recall you ever coming up with an idea to raise money, and let me say on record now, if you've got some ideas to raise money, share them. And I've told you that before, don't keep it to yourself. But you talk about the great talk, but there's never any detail. So you and I can work together. You're a smart guy, if you've got details about how this council can raise income, then you should share it. But I've never heard detail. So we talk around the periphery, or you do, but there's never any substance to those conversations. And the only business deal, am I pausing?
Councillor Joseph's got her point
right.
card up. She's going to explain what point it is first.
Point of accuracy, Mr. Mayor. We did come up with the idea of bonds which would raise money, which is just one idea that Councillor Nawaz did bring to the table in the last budget meetings last year, so that's not entirely accurate. Mr.
Fine, look, fine, but it's not a cast iron guarantee of revenue, okay? And you've got to sell them. What's the uptake? You know, there's bonds discussion as long as I can remember before Shaz joined the council. Now, the only actual money thing that I recall, which, you know, you criticised heavily, was the Hilton Hotel deal, which you voted against, but it makes us money. But let's talk about more of those deals. But anyway, I'll park that there. And you also made a comment about whether the Conservatives are fit to run the council. You and I don't decide that. The electorate decides that. So let's see what the electorate say at the ballot box, and trust in the electorate, because that's who makes the decisions about who runs their council. And they've trusted the Conservatives through 21 years of growth and prosperity. Look around you in the city. Yes, it's not perfect. We have our challenges. But that is visual. Who's brought the university? Who's developed Fletton Keys?
Councillor Fitzgerald, Councillor Joseph's got a card up again.
Oh, right.
Sorry, if we've had 21 years of growth and prosperity, how come we're facing bankruptcy?
We are not facing bankruptcy, and that is...
We are by your own slide, Councillor Fitzgerald, in 2018.
That's not what was said, Councillor Joseph. Councillor Coles referred to a moment in time that if we didn't change direction, then we could be facing bankruptcy and a Section 114 notice. That was what was actually said. So please don't mislead or get the public to believe that we are bankrupt, because we are not. We are finding a way forward together to fix this solution about... I'm nearly finished, Mr. Mayor, so we didn't interrupt, so I'd like the same courtesy if somebody wants to make a point. So we are nowhere near bankrupt. We are working on a plan. If government thought we were, we would have had intervention, and we have not got intervention. So I'm going to end it there. I've said all this. Everybody's had their piece. Let's not talk about this again. Let's move forward positively. And if anybody, and I'll say it again from when I started, my first council meeting, my door is open. And we are listening to opposition. I can't promise to do everything, but we will do our very best to try and be more collaborative, more cooperative, and together take the council forward and get us all out of this so we can start reinvesting money back into services, which is what the residents want. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We will now move to the vote. What point are you?
Point of accuracy on the fact that if he said that if we were facing bankruptcy, we would have had to have an intervention. So what is the SIPFA report and everything that we're now having intervened and things imposed on us, if not because we're at the point of no return and having to ask for intervention and extra money?
That is just not the case, Mr. Mayor. We asked for help so that we didn't get intervention and we didn't go into a position. So what we've done is we've taken the advice and support offered to us through SIPFA, through the LGA, and through Department of Housing, Levelling Up Housing and Communities, to find a way. If they didn't have the confidence in the administration, they would have intervened. And intervening means taking away the power that this council have and giving it to government officers or civil servants. That has not happened. And again, I'll reiterate, the point that Councillor Coles was making was if we didn't change tack, then we could have gone down that road, and we haven't. And I'm trying to be as positive as I can. And again, I'll rest there, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. We're going to now move to the vote. This will be on all the recommendations. As for one, for this agenda item, we will carry out as one, yeah. So, Rachel?
Thanks. Councillors, we are now voting on recommendations 1 through to 8 as altered of the financial improvement planning as set out in your additional information pack. Is that agreed? Or agreed? That's agreed. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald?
I forgot to say, because I did have an indication of the vote from Councillor Sanford's view. I'd just again like to thank people, everybody here tonight, and all the members of the group that have been working hard to get this together. And it's so nice that we can get a unanimous agreement on both the documents, and I look forward to working with them in the future again on it.
Thank you. Thank you, members. And finally, as this is Gillian's last meeting of council, I and members would like to wish you a well-earned rest and the best wishes for your next adventure. Furthermore, to all people who work for us, who use us, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and see you in 2022. Thank you.